The fog hung heavy over Paris that evening, thick and suffocating, as if the city itself were holding its breath. The gaslights flickered weakly, casting shadows that danced like spectres on the cobbled streets. Inspector Maigret sat alone in his office at the Quai des Orfèvres, staring at the case file before him. It was an enigma wrapped in silence, a man who had died but was still very much alive in the whispers of the city. Who was he, and why did no one seem to know his name? No one had seen the body, at least not in the way one would expect. Maigret's pipe sat cold in his hands as he let the quiet weigh on him, knowing that soon the chase would begin. And in the end, it was never the criminal that truly haunted him, but the questions that refused to leave. Before we dive into this case, take a moment to subscribe, like, and share. The mystery that awaits is one for the ages, and you won't want to miss a single twist in the tale. Now let's follow Maigret down this fog-filled path to find the truth. The morning the case began, Paris was washed in a thin grey mist that blurred the outlines of the city into uncertainty. From the windows of the Quai des Orfèvres, the river glimmered faintly beneath the fog, moving slowly, deliberately, as if it too carried secrets beneath its surface. Maigret stood at his desk, his pipe unlit, his heavy frame leaning slightly forward as he read the telegram that had arrived only minutes earlier. It was short, almost brusque, but its wording unsettled him in a way few things did anymore. A man found dead in a furnished room. Identity uncertain. Request immediate attention. Commissaire of the 9th arrondissement, that was all, no name. No address beyond a narrow street off Rue Molière. And yet something about the phrasing, identity uncertain, struck Maigret as peculiar, a man dead, but not entirely dead in the eyes of those who found him. He folded the telegram neatly, slipped it into his coat pocket, and reached for his bowler hat. Outside, the hallway echoed faintly with the sounds of typewriters, footsteps, and the murmur of voices. Paris was waking, and so was its darker half. By the time he stepped into the street, the fog had thickened, the lamps still burned pale yellow against the dawn, and carriages rolled quietly over wet cobblestones. He caught the scent of roasting chestnuts from a nearby vendor, that faint sweetness that always lingered in the early hours. As his car rumbled through the streets, Maigret let his thoughts drift. A dead man with no name could mean many things: a transient, a thief, a foreigner, or something altogether stranger. In Paris, anonymity was often a disguise, not a misfortune. The address brought him to a narrow, tired street between two shuttered cafes, the kind of place where everything seemed to observe you through half-drawn curtains. The building itself was old but respectable enough. A 3-story lodging house with a cracked facade and an air of quiet decay. A police constable waited by the entrance, stamping his feet to fight the cold. "Inspector Maigret," he greeted, straightening at once. "The room's upstairs. The landlady's waiting." She was a pale, anxious woman in her 50s, wrapped in a shawl that smelled faintly of kerosene. Her eyes darted from Maigret to the constable and back again. "It's dreadful, monsieur," she whispered. He'd been here for 3 months, always paid on time, never any trouble. And then, this morning, nothing but silence. "What name did he give when he moved in?" She hesitated. "Monsieur Charles something, I'm not sure. He signed only as C on the register." Quiet, polite. Always wore gloves, even indoors. The room was on the 2nd floor. Maigret pushed open the door, and a gust of cold air met him, not from an open window, but from the absence of warmth that clung to uninhabited places. The furniture was modest: a narrow bed, a small table, a basin, a wardrobe with one door slightly ajar. The body lay stretched upon the floor, as if the man had simply decided to rest there. He was dressed in a dark suit, threadbare at the cuffs, shoes polished but old. His face was neither young nor old, his expression strangely serene. What unsettled Maigret most was not the stillness, but the absence of struggle. A man who had not fought death, but almost welcomed it. "Any papers?" Maigret asked. "None, monsieur," replied the constable. "No wallet, no identification, just this." He handed Maigret a small object wrapped in cloth. It was a pocket watch, gold, finely made, but the hands had stopped at precisely 11:47. Maigret examined it carefully, then turned it over. The back bore an engraving, faint but clear. "À mon frère, F.L." A gift, perhaps. A connection, a clue. He lit his pipe, finally, filling the air with a slow, curling smoke that mixed with the faint scent of dust and something else. Lavender, maybe, from the drawer where the man had kept his clothes. He felt the atmosphere settle around him, as though the room itself had been holding its breath, waiting for someone to notice what was wrong. "Did anyone visit him recently?" he asked the landlady. She shook her head. "No one that I saw. He kept to himself, went out early, came back late. Sometimes I'd hear him pacing." "Was he employed?" "He said he was translating documents for a company near the opera, but I never saw him receive mail." Maigret's eyes moved to the table. A single sheet of paper lay there, blank, except for a faint watermark. The ink bottle beside it was dry. He picked up the pen, its nib cracked, unused for days. A man who wrote nothing, who lived quietly, who died without noise. And yet, as Maigret looked around, something in the air whispered contradiction. There were too many signs of restraint. A drawer closed too neatly, a rug slightly misaligned. Someone had tidied the room after the man's death, or perhaps before it. Downstairs, as he prepared to leave, Maigret paused in the narrow corridor. A mirror hung crooked on the wall, its surface blurred by age. He adjusted it absently, and in the reflection noticed a mark on the floorboards beneath the staircase, a scuff darkened by something sticky. He knelt and touched it with his gloved hand. Dried blood. Not much, just a few drops, but enough to tell a different story. The constable looked at him uncertainly. "You think he didn't die in the room?" "I think," said Maigret quietly, "that he may not have died at all." The words hung between them like the fog outside. Heavy, uncertain, but filled with meaning. By noon, the body had been taken to the morgue. The report would come later, but Maigret already knew he would find nothing ordinary there. He walked along the Seine, pipe smoke mingling with the damp air, and thought of the engraving on the watch. "À mon frère, F.L." Somewhere in the city someone else knew this man's name. Someone had loved him once, enough to give him a gift that outlived him. The water lapped softly against the embankment. A barge moved slowly under the Pont Neuf, and a vendor shouted for customers. Life continued as if death had not touched it. At the café across from the bridge, Maigret ordered a calvados and sat by the window, eyes unfocused. The world outside blurred into motion. The carriages, the pedestrians, the faint gleam of rain beginning to fall. In moments like these, he knew that truth did not arrive with fanfare. It emerged quietly, piece by piece, like dawn through fog. He took another slow sip, then opened his notebook. He wrote 2 words, "Find F.L." The case had only just begun, but in his mind Maigret already sensed its shape. Something intimate, deceptive, and deeply human. The kind of case that began with a dead man who was, in every way that mattered, still alive. He glanced once more at the Seine. The water shimmered faintly in the grey light, carrying away reflections that would never return. "Who are you?" Maigret murmured to the city. "And why do you haunt us still?" Outside, the rain began to fall in earnest, erasing footprints on the street below, as if Paris itself were determined to hide the truth once more. The next morning, Paris seemed somehow sharper. The fog thinner, the sounds clearer, the city more aware of itself. At the Quai des Orfèvres, Maigret arrived earlier than usual. The corridors smelled faintly of polish and cigarette smoke, the remnants of the night shift's long hours. He hung his coat, filled his pipe, and sat behind his desk, where a thin folder awaited him. The report from the morgue lay on top, written in the precise, dispassionate hand of Dr. Paul. Cause of death: cardiac failure, no signs of struggle, possible poisoning unconfirmed, pending further analysis. Maigret read it twice, though it told him less than the silence of the room where the man had died. A natural death, perhaps, but natural deaths rarely sent telegrams to the 9th arrondissement in the middle of the night. He leaned back, eyes half closed, letting the images return. The motionless figure, the stopped watch, the faint scent of lavender and dust. There was a knock on the door. Lucas entered, tall and serious as ever, his coat still damp from the morning rain. "The landlord from Rue Molière sent word, Chief. Someone tried to enter the room last night. Around 2 in the morning, she heard glass breaking." Maigret's pipe went out. "Was anyone caught?" "She says she shouted from her window when the man ran off. Left footprints in the courtyard." "Let's go," Maigret said simply, rising from his chair. By the time they reached Rue Molière, the fog had lifted entirely, leaving behind a hard white light that revealed every flaw in the old street. The landlady waited at the doorway, wringing her hands in agitation. "I told the officers," she said, her voice trembling. "It was a man in a dark coat. I couldn't see his face, but I heard the glass shatter from the back window of Monsieur C's room." Maigret walked upstairs slowly. The air was colder today, and the faint smell of dust was mixed now with the acrid scent of broken glass. The rear window had indeed been smashed, the shards glittering on the floor like fragments of ice. He bent down to examine them, his reflection fractured into a dozen small pieces. "Strange," he murmured. "Who would break into a dead man's room?" Lucas said nothing. He stood near the wardrobe, examining the drawers. "Everything seems untouched, except this one." He pulled open the lowest drawer, revealing a small compartment beneath a false bottom. Inside lay a folded piece of paper and a small key. Maigret took the paper carefully. It was a note, written in a slanted, hurried hand. "The truth sleeps beneath the bridge." "Which bridge?" Lucas asked quietly. "That's what we'll have to find out." He turned the key over in his hand. Brass, old but well kept. No inscription, no number. The kind of key that belonged not to a door, but to a box, a cabinet, or perhaps a locker. The landlady hovered in the doorway, her eyes darting nervously between them. "Do you think it was a thief, Inspector?" Maigret looked at her kindly. "A thief who breaks in after a death rarely comes for money, madame. He comes for what was left behind." They sealed the room again, but the echo of that broken glass followed Maigret long after he'd left. As he walked back toward the Seine, he stopped at a small cafe and took a seat by the window. The hum of conversation, the clatter of cups, the faint hiss of the espresso machine, all the details of a morning that belonged to everyone but the dead. He took out the note once more. "The truth sleeps beneath the bridge." The handwriting was neither elegant nor crude. Something about it felt practiced, as though the writer had written such messages before. And there was something else. The faintest trace of perfume on the paper, something floral but sharp. He thought of the watch, the engraving, the faint drops of blood. He thought of the missing name. The story was no longer about a man who had simply ceased to exist. It was about what he had taken with him, or what others feared he might leave behind. By afternoon, Maigret and Lucas stood beneath the Pont Saint-Michel, the river sliding past them in dark ribbons. The sun had vanished again behind a pale sky, leaving everything colourless but not lifeless. A small, homeless encampment lingered beneath the archway, and a man with a face like weathered leather nodded to them as they approached. "Your police," the man said, "looking for someone." Maigret smiled faintly. "Perhaps. Did you see anyone come here last night?" The man scratched his chin. "Always people at night, monsieur. Lovers, thieves, ghosts. Depends on what you're looking for." "What about something thrown into the river?" That made the man pause. He pointed toward the embankment. "There, I heard a splash around midnight, too heavy for a bottle." The Seine moved with quiet patience, its surface rippling under the faint breeze. Maigret crouched near the edge, eyes searching the water's slow rhythm. The current here was deceptive, slow at the surface, swift beneath. If someone had thrown something in, it would not have drifted far. Lucas climbed down with a small hook and line borrowed from a fisherman nearby. After a few minutes, he caught something, small, metallic, and heavy. He pulled it up slowly, water dripping from the end of the line. A box. No bigger than a book, covered in tarnished brass, its lock still intact. Maigret took the key from his pocket, and with a quiet click, the lid opened. Inside lay a stack of folded papers, a passport, and a photograph. The photograph was of two men standing outside a small inn, both smiling, both with their arms around each other's shoulders. On the back was written, Liège, 1923. Maigret studied it for a long moment, the wind tugging gently at his coat. Then he looked at the passport. The name read François Leclerc, and the face, though younger, was unmistakable. The dead man from Rue Molière. Lucas exhaled softly. "So, F.L. François Leclerc." "Yes," Maigret murmured, slipping the papers carefully back into the box. The brother's gift? The engraving on the watch. He wasn't hiding his name. He was hiding his past. As they climbed back up toward the street, the first bells of evening began to sound across the city. The air carried that familiar mixture of cold river damp and distant bread from the bakeries. Maigret lit his pipe again, letting the smoke curl into the fading light. "There's always a reason," he said finally. "A man doesn't live under a false name for nothing. The question is, who was he before he died, and who wanted him forgotten?" Lucas nodded, glancing back toward the river. "And the one who came last night?" Maigret looked at the bridge once more. He already knew what we just learned, but he wasn't looking for the truth. He was trying to bury it. They walked in silence for a while, the sound of their footsteps merging with the hum of the city. Somewhere, beneath the murmur of Paris, the truth waited, submerged, patient, and unwilling to stay hidden forever. The following day dawned with a reluctant light that slid across the rooftops of Paris like pale silk. The Seine was restless, swollen from the night's rain, carrying along fragments of wood, paper, and the faint smell of distant industry. From his window at the Quai des Orfèvres, Maigret could see the water moving beneath the Pont Neuf, slow, deliberate, patient. He had always thought of the river as a kind of silent witness, seeing all that men wished to hide. And now, after finding that small brass box beneath its surface, he was certain the Seine had once again been keeping watch over a secret. He was waiting for Janvier, who had gone to verify the passport. Maigret sat at his desk, pipe in hand, reviewing the name written there, François Leclerc. It was a name without scandal, but not without weight. Leclercs were a common breed in France, the kind who blended quietly into the rhythm of their towns until the day something, fate, guilt, or both, drew them toward Paris. The photograph from Liège still lay before him. The second man in it was older, stockier, with the faint squint of a labourer. The smile was sincere, but Maigret had seen enough faces to know when a smile hid more than it showed. When Janvier finally entered, the noise of the corridor followed him. Telephones ringing, footsteps, voices. He looked tired, but satisfied. "We found him," he said. François Leclerc, born in Liège, 1894, a merchant once, lived in Paris under the name Charles Martin since 1934. No family listed here. But there's a brother, Louis Leclerc, last registered in Liège. Maigret nodded slowly. Alive? Unclear. There was a note in the Belgian file that he left for the colonies after some trouble with a business partner. Fraud, they say, never returned. And François? No record of any crime, but the passport is old. It hasn't been used in years. Maigret relit his pipe. The smoke curled upward in a thin grey spiral, dissolving into the yellow morning air. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the cleanest men spend a lifetime hiding the dirt they never made." He stood and reached for his coat. "We're going to Liège." The journey north took most of the afternoon. The train rolled past the edges of Paris, warehouses, canals, and grey suburban houses where laundry fluttered weakly in the wind, before surrendering to the green expanse of the countryside. Maigret sat by the window, half listening, to the steady rhythm of the wheels. Across from him, Janvier read the morning paper, though his eyes wandered now and then toward his superior, studying that impenetrable calm that seemed to rest on Maigret like a coat he never took off. They arrived at dusk. Liège greeted them with a soft drizzle and the smell of coal from the factories. The narrow streets glistened beneath the lamps. They found the small inn from the photograph, Auberge du Canal, still standing near the riverbank. Inside, the light was warm, the air heavy with tobacco and beer. The innkeeper, a man with a face as round as the clock above the counter, looked up when Maigret showed him the photograph. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed in thought. Yes, I remember them. Two brothers, always quiet, always polite. They stayed here for nearly a month. Must have been, 12 years ago, maybe more. Said they were waiting for some paperwork about a sale. Then one morning, the younger one, François, left alone. The other stayed behind another week, then disappeared too. "Disappeared?" Maigret asked. The innkeeper shrugged. "Left without paying the last bill. Took nothing but a small suitcase. I never saw either of them again." Maigret nodded, thanked him, and left a few coins on the counter. Outside, the drizzle had thickened into a fine rain, the kind that blurred the world without truly soaking it. They stood under the awning, watching the water ripple in the gutter. "Chief," Janvier said quietly, "do you think the brother's still alive?" Maigret took his time answering. "If he is, he's been watching. Men like that always are." They spent the night in a modest hotel near the station. Maigret didn't sleep much. He lay in the half-dark, listening to the rhythmic hum of trains departing into the night. He thought about François, about the years lived under another name, about the quiet death in a rented room. What drove a man to erase himself so completely? And why had someone come searching for him only after his death? The next morning, they visited the local prefecture. The records were dusty, the clerks polite, but indifferent. Yet within an hour, Maigret found what he was looking for, a small file marked Leclerc, Louis, 1935. Inside, a report from the colonial office in Marseille, subject departed for French Equatorial Africa, whereabouts unknown since 1938. The last line caught his eye, accompanied by one associate, name not verified. He stared at that phrase for a long moment. Not verified. Such a simple thing, yet often where truth hides best. They returned to Paris that evening, the train rocking gently through the night. Maigret stared out into the darkness, the reflection of his pipe's ember glowing faintly against the glass. By the time they reached the city, dawn had begun again, pale, uncertain, but undeniably alive. Back at the Quai des Orfèvres, the brass box still waited on his desk. He opened it once more, this time taking out the folded documents beneath the passport. There were letters, 3 of them, all written in the same hurried hand as the note from the hidden drawer. He read the first. "Francois, you must understand I never meant for it to end this way. They'll come for you first, because your name is still clean, but you have the papers, you have the key. Don't let them find it." L. The second was shorter, more frantic. "They know. The man from Rue de Provence saw you. Burn everything and leave tonight." And the last one, written in a steadier tone, simply said, "If I do not return, you must tell no one, not even the police. I am already dead." Maigret leaned back, pipe forgotten in his hand. Outside, the river moved on, indifferent to the city's endless confessions. He understood now why the man had lived in silence, why he had kept the watch engraved for a brother he no longer spoke of. Whatever crime had been committed, it was buried not in law, but in loyalty. Lucas entered quietly, carrying the morning's dispatches. "Anything new, Chief?" Maigret didn't look up. "Only ghosts," he said softly. "And they're beginning to speak." He folded the letters, replaced them in the box, and closed the lid gently, as one might close a coffin. Yet the words lingered in his mind. "I am already dead." He rose, crossed to the window, and watched the city awaken beneath a sky still washed with grey. Somewhere out there, someone else had read those words too. Someone who had come to Rue Molière in the night, searching for the same truth. And as Maigret's gaze drifted toward the river, the first sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting off the water like a blade. Continue. Chapter 4. The telephone call from yesterday. 1,200 words. It was just past 10 when the call came. The kind that slices through a morning's calm like the edge of a blade. Maigret was at his desk, reviewing reports that said nothing and implied too much when the black telephone began to ring. Its sound, sharp and insistent, echoed through the stone corridors of the Quai des Orfèvres. He picked up slowly, as if already aware that the voice on the other end would change the shape of the day. "Inspector Maigret?" The voice was male, low, with that peculiar restraint that comes from fear disguised as composure. "You're looking into the man from Rue Molière?" Maigret said nothing. Silence, he had learned long ago, often told more than words. After a pause, the voice continued, softer now. "You're wasting your time. He's been dead for years." Then the line went dead. A faint click, and only the hum of the empty connection remained. Maigret replaced the receiver carefully. He did not move for several seconds. Outside, the morning traffic hummed faintly across the river. Inside, the only movement was the thin ribbon of smoke rising from his pipe. "The telephone call from yesterday," he murmured to himself, though the words had no clear meaning yet. Lucas entered a few moments later, holding a fresh report. "The toxicology came back, Chief. No trace of poison. Clean as a whistle." Maigret nodded absently. "Someone just called. Said the man's been dead for years." Lucas frowned. "A prank?" "No," Maigret said. "Fear never jokes." He rose, the great bulk of his frame moving with deliberate slowness. Trace that call if you can, though I doubt you'll find much. And have Janvier check every telephone booth within half a kilometre of the Gare de Lyon. He'll have started there." Lucas hesitated. "You think the caller knew him personally?" "I think," Maigret said, reaching for his coat, "that the dead are not finished speaking." Outside, the day had turned brittle with wind. The Seine's surface shivered beneath a pale sun. He walked toward the bridge, his collar turned up, his pipe unlit. There was something about the tone of that voice that clung to him. The deliberate calm, the precision of its words. Not the voice of a criminal, he thought, but of someone who had already lost too much to fear anything else. He crossed the bridge and stopped midway, gazing down at the river. Below, a barge moved lazily through the current, its deck piled high with coal. A young man on board looked up and waved to someone on the quay, a fleeting gesture of ordinary life that felt almost mocking in its simplicity. He turned toward Rue de Provence next, the address mentioned in the letters found inside the brass box. The street was narrow and busy, lined with shops whose windows reflected the restless rhythm of the city. He found the building easily. An old stationery shop, its sign faded, its doorway framed by dust. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of paper, glue, and something faintly chemical. A woman in her 60s stood behind the counter, spectacles low on her nose. "Can I help you, monsieur?" "Perhaps," Maigret said, showing his badge. "I'm looking for a man named Leclerc, François or Louis. Did either ever do business here?" The woman pursed her lips, thinking. "Leclerc. That name, yes. Long ago. They ordered a set of custom seals, fine brass ones engraved with initials. Wait." She disappeared behind a curtain, rummaged through a drawer, and returned with a small ledger. "Here it is. FL ordered March 1936, paid in cash. Address, Rue Molière." Maigret glanced at the entry, his eyes narrowing. "Did they return after that?" "Only once," she said. "The older one, I think. He wanted the mould destroyed, said it was no longer needed." "Did you destroy it?" "I thought I did," she replied. "But it's strange. When I looked for it last month, it was gone." Maigret thanked her, then stepped outside, the bell above the door tinkling softly as it closed. The street seemed colder now. Somewhere nearby, a man was whistling an old tune. Light, careless, oblivious to the weight of the past pressing on these walls. He walked without clear direction until he reached a café on the corner. The smell of strong coffee drew him in. He sat by the window, ordered a calvados, and lit his pipe. As the first curl of smoke rose, the reflection of a man appeared in the glass. Dark coat, hat pulled low, watching. When Maigret turned, the man was already leaving, his pace unhurried but deliberate. Maigret rose, tossed a coin on the table, and followed. The street outside was crowded, but the stranger's outline was easy to spot. Tall, with a limp barely noticeable except in the rhythm of his stride. Maigret followed at a distance, down the boulevard, past the tram stop, into a narrower lane that led toward the river. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, the man vanished. Maigret stopped. The lane was empty except for a delivery cart and a child chasing a hoop. The faint echo of footsteps faded into the distance. He stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the city pressing in from all sides, its alleys, its secrets, its ghosts. Whoever the man was, he had known Maigret was following. And that meant only one thing. The game was no longer about finding the truth. It was about staying ahead of it. Back at the Quai des Orfèvres, the phone was ringing again. Lucas had already answered, his face pale. "Chief," he said quietly, handing over the receiver. "It's the same voice." Maigret took it, saying nothing. "You shouldn't have gone to Rue de Provence," the voice said calmly. "There's nothing for you there." "Who are you?" Maigret asked. A soft exhale, almost a laugh. "Someone who buried a man once and doesn't intend to do it again." "Did you kill François Leclerc?" "No, I saved him, but you're digging in a grave that was sealed years ago." The line went dead once more. For a long time, Maigret didn't move. The hum of the office around him grew distant, unreal. He set the receiver down gently, then walked to the window. Outside, the river glinted faintly under the afternoon light. He spoke half to himself, half to the city. "If he was already dead, then what have we buried?" Lucas watched him in silence. Maigret turned at last, eyes calm but distant. "Find every record of Louis Leclerc's departure. Passenger lists, colonial manifests, telegraph receipts. And Lucas, have someone checked the morgue again? I want to know if the body in Rue Molière still lies there." When Lucas returned, an hour later, his expression had changed. "Chief, the morgue clerk says the body was claimed this morning, signed for, proper paperwork and all." "By whom?" Lucas hesitated. "A man with identification papers for François Leclerc." For a moment, the air in the room seemed to still completely. Then Maigret said quietly, "Then our dead man has just walked out of the morgue." Outside, the city carried on as always. Trams clattering, café doors opening and closing, the eternal rhythm of life. But somewhere in that rhythm now moved a man who should not exist. And under the watchful eyes of the Seine, Maigret knew the real mystery had only just begun. Night returned to Paris with a quiet unease, a strange hush that even the traffic along the boulevards couldn't dispel. The lights along the Seine shimmered faintly in the damp air, their reflections breaking and reforming in the black current like restless thoughts. At the Quai des Orfèvres, the building stood half asleep, its windows glowing dimly against the fog. Maigret had not left since the afternoon. He sat in his office, hat on the chair beside him, coat draped loosely over the backrest. The telephone call still echoed in his mind. "The man's been dead for years." The words had come from someone who knew both Leclerc brothers, of that he was certain. Someone who wasn't merely threatening him, but warning him. Lucas entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He placed one on the desk and spoke in a low tone. "We checked the morgue, Chief. The paperwork was perfect. Signature, identification, even a doctor's approval, all legitimate." "Who signed for it?" "A Monsieur René Villard." "Villard," Maigret repeated, tasting the name. "And who is this Villard?" Lucas consulted his notes. "An address in Montreuil, according to the records. He's listed as a cousin to François Leclerc. No prior record, no criminal background. Runs a small import business near the river." Maigret stood, stretching his back. "Import business," he said, thoughtfully. "That's what they always call it." By the time they reached Montreuil, the rain had returned, thin, slanting lines against the windshield, illuminated briefly by passing headlights. The street where Villard lived was a modest one, lined with warehouses and shuttered workshops. They found the address easily enough, a narrow building with a brass plate reading R. Villard and Fils, Maritime Goods. The door was locked, the interior dark. Maigret knocked twice. A minute later, footsteps approached, and the door opened just enough for a pair of cautious eyes to appear. "Yes?" "Inspector Maigret, we're here about François Leclerc." The door hesitated, then opened wider. The man who stood before them was in his 50s, thin and pale, with a careful politeness that seemed rehearsed. His hands trembled slightly as he motioned them inside. "I was expecting you," Villard said. The office smelled faintly of varnish and damp rope. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk, but too neatly, like a stage set before the curtain rises. Maigray's eyes wandered over the walls where framed photographs of ships hung in tidy order. "You claimed the body," Maigret began. "On what authority?" Villard smiled faintly. "He was my cousin. The hospital required a family signature. I didn't want him to be left there among strangers." "When? Did you last see him alive?" Villard hesitated, lighting a cigarette. 15 years ago, perhaps more. We had a falling out over money." "Yet you knew where to find him?" A flicker of unease crossed Villard's face. "He wrote to me once, a few months ago, said he was unwell, wanted to make peace." "Do you have that letter?" He hesitated, then opened a drawer and produced a single folded page. Maigret read it silently. It was brief, written in the same slanted hand he had seen before. "Dear René, I am tired. The city feels colder now. If anything happens, let them know I tried to make things right." F.L. Maigret looked up. "And what did he mean by make things right?" Villard shrugged. "Perhaps guilt. He was always the sentimental one." "Sentimental men rarely hide under false names," Maigret said. "Or die alone in furnished rooms?" The other man said nothing. Only the faint ticking of a wall clock filled the silence. Maigret felt the air tighten. There was something in Villard's composure that didn't fit, not the fear of a guilty man, but the wariness of someone who had already chosen which truths to bury. "Tell me, Monsieur Villard," he said softly, "who paid for the funeral?" Villard looked genuinely surprised. "Funeral?" "Yes," Maigret said, watching him closely. "The body was taken this morning. Where did it go?" Villard's cigarette trembled. I thought it was still at the morgue." Lucas stepped forward, unfolding a sheet of paper. "According to this," he said, "the remains were transferred to Saint-Ouen Cemetery, paid in cash, no receipt traceable." Maigret turned to Villard again. "Then if you didn't bury him, someone did. Someone who wanted him gone quickly." The man opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes flickered toward the window, toward the rain-smeared street. Maigret followed his gaze and saw for the briefest instant the silhouette of a man standing under a lamppost across the road. A dark coat, a hat pulled low, watching. When Maigret looked again, the street was empty. They left without arresting Villard. There was nothing yet to hold him on. But as they drove back toward the city centre, Maigret spoke in a low, thoughtful tone. "He's lying, but not for himself. There's someone behind him, someone pulling the strings. The man under the lamp wasn't there by chance." Lucas nodded. "You think it's the brother?" "I think Louis Leclerc is either alive," Maigret said, "or someone wants us to believe he is." The car crossed the Pont d'Austerlitz, where the river glimmered black and silver beneath the rain. Maigret's reflection swam briefly in the window. Tired eyes, pipe clenched between his teeth, the face of a man who had spent a lifetime staring into other people's silences. Back at the quay, he found a telegram waiting on his desk. It had arrived less than an hour earlier. The message was brief and unsigned. "Stop looking for the dead. They are looking for you." Lucas read it over his shoulder, his brow furrowing. "What do you make of that?" Maigret exhaled a long plume of smoke. "It means," he said slowly, "that we're getting close enough to frighten someone, and frightened men start making mistakes." He turned toward the window. The rain had eased, leaving the city slick and shining beneath the street lamps. Somewhere out there, a body had been claimed by a man who didn't exist, and a name long buried was walking again through Paris. He tapped his pipe against the ashtray and said quietly, "Let them make the first mistake." the shadows are never silent for long. And outside, the river answered him, a faint murmur against the embankment, as if the Seine itself were listening. Morning found Paris still damp from the rain, its streets glistening under a fragile sun. The mist had lifted, but left behind that peculiar heaviness that always followed a night of unanswered questions. At the Quai des Orfèvres, the corridors buzzed faintly with the usual rhythm of reports and footsteps, but Maigret felt an unfamiliar stillness within himself. The telegram from the previous night, "Stop looking for the dead, they are looking for you," lay folded in his pocket, its words burned into his thoughts. He sat at his desk, studying a small card left for him by the clerk. "Madame Renée Leclerc requests to see you, Rue de la Paix." The handwriting was elegant, careful. A widow's hand, Maigret thought, and perhaps at last a voice willing to speak where others had only whispered. By the time he reached Rue de la Paix, the city had resumed its elegance, ladies stepping from carriages, polished shop windows reflecting the morning light, the faint scent of perfume drifting from the boutiques. But among that surface charm, Maigret sensed something brittle, as though the brightness existed only to conceal the cracks beneath. Madame Renée Leclerc lived on the third floor of a graceful but aging building. A maid showed him into a drawing-room where the curtains were drawn halfway, muting the daylight to a soft grey. The woman who rose to greet him was in her late 40s, her beauty preserved not by vanity but by restraint. Her black dress, though simple, spoke of quiet dignity. "Inspector," she said, her voice low, "I suppose you're here because of François." "Yes," Maigret replied, taking the seat she offered. "You knew him well then?" She smiled faintly. "He was my husband." It was said without hesitation, but also without warmth, a statement of fact, not of sentiment. "I didn't know he was married," Maigret said. "Few did," she answered. "François preferred it that way. He believed his work required discretion." "What kind of work was that, madame?" She hesitated, then looked directly at him. "My husband was not the man you think. He wasn't hiding from the police, nor from his brother. He was hiding from something far worse, the past they shared." Maigret said nothing, letting the silence pull at the truth. Outside, the muffled clip of horses on the cobblestones marked the passage of time. "Louis was the clever one," she continued softly. "He drew François into a business that promised riches, shipments through Africa, rare minerals, contracts that were never quite legitimate. When it fell apart, Louis vanished. François took the blame. It ruined him." "And you?" Maigret asked. "I waited," she said simply. "We lived quietly after that, until he left one morning without a word. I heard from him only once more, a letter years later. He wrote that he could no longer bear the weight of what they'd done." "What had they done, madam?" Her eyes flickered toward the mantelpiece, where a photograph stood half-hidden behind a vase. Maigret rose, studying it. It was an old picture. Two men beside a ship, both younger, both smiling under a foreign sun. He recognized François immediately. The other was harder, leaner, his smile sharper than the rest of him. "Louis," Maigret murmured. "Yes," she said behind him. "That was taken in Brazzaville. They went there to finalize a deal that never existed. The money disappeared. So did the investor. Some say Louis killed him, others say they both did." "Did François ever tell you which version was true?" She shook her head. "He said only that Louis had made a promise, one that followed them both. When François came back, he told me Louis was gone, lost at sea, but I never believed it." Maigret turned to her. And now her composure faltered for the first time. Now I think he's here, watching, making sure the past stays buried. There was a knock at the door. The maid entered with a telegram on a silver tray. Madame Leclerc glanced at it, her hand trembling slightly. Maigret saw the colour drain from her face. She passed it to him wordlessly. The message was short. "You talk too much." Elle Maigret folded the paper slowly. "How long have you been receiving these?" 3 days, she whispered. "They arrive without a sender, always signed the same way. I thought it was some cruel joke. But last night I saw a man standing by the street lamp outside. He didn't move until I turned off the light." "Did you recognize him?" Her silence was answer enough. Maigret stood. "I'll have someone posted outside your building tonight. You're not to go anywhere alone. Do you understand?" She nodded faintly. "Do you think he killed François?" Maigret hesitated. "If he didn't, he's protecting the one who did." He left her apartment with the telegram folded tightly in his hand. The rain had returned, soft but persistent, tapping against his hat brim as he stepped into the street. Across the boulevard, a man in a dark coat lingered under the awning of a tobacconist's shop. He pretended to study the display but turned away the instant Maigret's eyes met his. Lucas emerged from the car, scanning the same direction. "Do you want us to follow him?" "No," Maigret said quietly. "He wants to be seen. Let him think we're blind." As the car pulled away, the figure slipped back into the shadows, swallowed by the crowd. Back at headquarters, Maigret placed the telegram beside the one he'd received. The handwriting was the same, angular, precise, deliberate. He looked at the pair of messages and said to himself, "So, Louis, you are alive after all." He lit his pipe, watching the smoke drift across the papers. The silence in the room grew heavy, the kind of silence that always preceded revelation. Somewhere beyond the fog and the bridges, the Seine whispered its slow secrets to the stones. And Maigret, staring into that grey emptiness, knew that the dead man's shadow was no longer just a memory. It was moving among them once again. The city was still half asleep when Maigret arrived at the Quai des Orfèvres the next morning. The grey light of dawn filtered through the blinds, slicing across his office like the bars of a cell. He hadn't slept. The memory of Madame Leclerc's trembling hands and the letters signed L had haunted him through the night. He could still see the man beneath the street lamp outside her apartment, motionless, waiting, as if watching over a tomb that hadn't yet been closed. He poured himself a small glass of cognac, his first of the day, and lit his pipe. The smoke drifted lazily upward, curling like the thoughts that refused to settle. When Lucas entered, coat still damp from the morning fog, Maigret didn't look up. "Well?" he asked. Lucas laid a file on the desk. "We traced the telegraphs. They were sent from different kiosks across the city. Montparnasse, Saint-Lazare, and one from the Latin Quarter. No witnesses. Paid in cash." "Of course," Maigret said, half smiling. "Men like Louis don't leave fingerprints. They leave ghosts." He picked up the file. The receipts were neatly copied, but the pattern caught his eye. Different kiosks, but all within walking distance of the river. He's circling the Seine. Lucas frowned. Why the river? Maigret tamped the ash from his pipe. Because he buried something there once. Something more than a body. He rose and crossed to the window. The city was waking now, its heartbeat audible in the rumble of carts, the shrill cry of street vendors, the clatter of distant hooves. Somewhere in that restless pulse moved the man they sought, invisible, cautious, guided by an instinct that had kept him alive long after he should have been caught. "Fine Janvier," Maigret said, Tell him to pull every customs manifest from the year 1934. I want to know what shipments left Paris under the name Leclerc or Villard, and have someone watch Madame Leclerc's building discreetly. If Louis is here, he won't let her out of sight." By noon, the first reports began to arrive. Janvier came in carrying a stack of yellow documents bound with twine. "Here," he said, setting them down. "Exports listed under R. Villard and Fils. But look at this." He pointed to one manifest stamped Brazzaville, 1935. The declared cargo, medical equipment and survey tools. Maigret's finger traced the margin. "Authorized by Ministry of Health, but the seal's wrong. It's a forgery." "What were they shipping then?" Lucas asked. Maigret looked up, eyes narrowing. "Gold, or something worth killing for." He studied the file again, then turned to the others. They used Villard's company as cover. Louis organized the route. François handled the paperwork. When the deal went bad, Louis vanished with the profits. François stayed behind, carrying the guilt. "Until someone found him," Lucas said quietly. Maigret nodded. "Or until he found someone he shouldn't have." A knock interrupted them. The clerk entered, carrying a telegram. Maigret opened it, scanning the words quickly. Then his jaw tightened. Madame Leclerc's maid found her door open. "The apartment's been searched." "Was she hurt?" Lucas asked. "She's gone." They drove to Rue de la Paix through the thin drizzle that had begun to fall again, the car's tires hissing over the wet cobblestones. The building stood silent, respectable, indifferent to its own secrets. Inside, the drawing room was in disarray. Drawers pulled open, curtains torn, a chair overturned. The photograph on the mantelpiece was gone. Maigret walked slowly through the wreckage, eyes scanning every surface. The air smelled faintly of perfume and dust, but beneath that something metallic, acrid. Gun oil. He turned to the maid, a timid girl clutching her apron. "When did you last see her?" "Last night, monsieur. She said she was expecting a visitor." "A relative, perhaps?" "She told me to go home early." "Did she mention a name?" The girl shook her head. "Only that she'd waited long enough." Maigret stepped to the window. Across the street, the same lamp-post stood glistening with rain. "He came for her," he murmured. "And she let him in?" They searched the apartment thoroughly. In the bedroom, Lucas found a small wooden box beneath the bed, similar in shape to the one Maigret had recovered from the Seine. Inside lay a folded document, yellowed with age, a colonial shipping contract, unsigned, and beneath it a faded photograph. Two men again, this time, seated at a table covered with maps. On the back, written in ink that had almost vanished, the last promise. Brazzaville. "Same handwriting," Lucas said. "Louis is." Maigret stared at the photograph. A promise between brothers, one kept, one broken. They left the apartment as the bells of Saint-Roch began to ring. The sound carried through the damp air like a summons. Maigret paused. At the bottom of the stairway, pipe unlit, thoughts heavy. "He's tying up loose ends," he said finally. "First François, now the widow. The past is closing in on him." That evening, Maigret returned to the river. He walked along the embankment where barges were moored, their hulls creaking softly against the current. Somewhere above him, the faint strains of an accordion drifted from a café terrace. The city was alive again, unaware of the quiet hunt unfolding beneath its skin. He stopped beneath the Pont Marie, where the shadows deepened and the air smelled of cold stone and river mist. A figure emerged from the gloom, Janvier, hat pulled low, coat collar up. "We've traced Villard's business partner," Janvier said. "He went bankrupt 6 months ago, died shortly after. Suicide, they say." But look here." He handed Maigret a note found among the man's papers. "L returned. Said the debt was paid. Told me not to speak." Maigret pocketed the paper. "Louis was here long before Francois died, watching, waiting." He looked toward the river, its dark surface reflecting the faint tremor of light from the bridges. "It's strange, isn't it?" he said softly. "How fate moves like water. It carries what we throw into it, and returns it when we least expect." Janvier said nothing. The silence between them was broken only by the slow passage of a barge sliding beneath the arch. Maigret turned away from the river at last. "He'll come again," he said quietly. "Men like Louis always do. They can't resist watching the consequences of their own ghosts." As they walked back toward the quay, the city lights shimmered through the mist, each reflection trembling on the water like a promise made and broken long ago. And somewhere beyond that shimmer, unseen yet near, a man followed their steps, careful, silent, patient as fate itself. The night the stranger appeared, Paris was soaked in a restless drizzle that blurred the gaslights into trembling halos. The wind from the Seine carried the scent of iron and smoke, and the city's voices, carriages, footsteps, the faint clatter of dishes from late cafes, wove together into a melancholy rhythm. Maigret sat by his office window, pipe unlit, eyes on the river. The documents lay open before him, yellowed and weary, but his mind was elsewhere. He could feel it now, the tightening circle, the pattern closing in. Louis Leclerc was near. The telephone broke the silence, its bell harsh and immediate. Lucas answered, then turned, face pale. "Chief, they've found someone asking for you at the Gare du Nord. Says his name's Louis Leclerc." Maigret's pipe slipped slightly from his hand. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to still around him. "Alive, then," he murmured, "or pretending to be?" He arrived at the station half an hour later. The air inside was thick with the smell of coal and damp wool. Trains hissed like beasts in the mist, their lamps glowing faintly through the haze. A policeman led Maigret toward the waiting room, where a solitary figure sat by the window, a man in his 60s, broad-shouldered, coat buttoned tight despite the warmth inside. His hat rested neatly beside him, and a walking stick leaned against the wall. "Inspector?" he said, rising as Maigret approached. His voice was deep, calm, and entirely without surprise. "You've been looking for me." Maigret studied him silently. The resemblance to the photograph was undeniable. The same eyes, though older now, clouded not with fear, but with fatigue. "So you're Louis Leclerc?" Maigret said finally. "I was," the man replied. "Once." They sat opposite each other, the table between them littered with cigarette ash and old newspapers. Outside, a train whistled mournfully into the fog. "I suppose you've come to turn yourself in?" Maigret asked. The man smiled faintly. "Turn myself in for what? For surviving? For being the one left behind? You disappeared after Brazzaville. People said you were dead. Sometimes death is the only way to live in peace." Maigret leaned back, watching him carefully. "Your brother didn't seem to share that peace." Louis's expression flickered, the mask slipping for just a moment. "Francois was weak," he said quietly. "He couldn't carry what we'd done. He wanted to confess, to ruin us both. I told him to stay quiet, to let it end. But he couldn't." "So you killed him?" Louis's eyes met his, cold and steady. "No, I loved him, in my own way. I tried to help him disappear again, as I had, but someone got to him first." "Who?" Louis didn't answer. Instead, he took a folded envelope from his coat and placed it on the table. "You've been chasing ghosts, Inspector. This will tell you where they come from." Maigret hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a single page of typed text, a ledger entry, shipment number 46A, Brazzaville, April 1935, value 200,000 francs. Recipient, Ministry of Colonial Trade, discrepancy noted. He looked up. Gold. Louis nodded. A government deal, but not an honest one. When it went wrong, someone had to take the blame. They chose Francois. I tried to make it right, but by then, it was too late. And now? Maigret asked softly. Why come back? Louis sighed, leaning heavily on his cane. Because they never stopped watching me, because even ghosts grow tired of silence, and because I heard you found him. Someone took his body from the morgue. Louis's gaze darkened. That wasn't me. Then who was it? For the first time, real fear flashed across the man's face. There's a man named Villard, he whispered. You've met him, haven't you? He was part of it. He's the one who buried the past. And he's the one who's digging it up again. Maigret rose slowly. Where is he now? Louis shook his head. I don't know. But he won't stop. Not until the last of us is gone. They sat in silence for a long moment, the sound of rain drumming faintly on the station roof. Maigret felt the familiar heaviness of inevitability settle in his chest. Fate had a cruel sense of symmetry, the same bridges, the same river, the same secrets resurfacing after 20 years. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. You'll come with me to headquarters. We'll talk more there. Louis didn't resist. He rose, collected his hat, and followed without a word. But as they stepped onto the platform, a sudden movement caught Maigret's eye, a flicker of shadow near the columns. Before he could turn fully, the crack of a gunshot split the air. Louis stumbled forward, his hat tumbling to the floor, a dark bloom spreading across his coat. Maigret caught him before he fell completely, lowering him to the cold stone tiles. Villard! Louis gasped, the word barely audible. He's not done. Then his eyes unfocused, his breath fading into the sound of the departing train. The shooter had vanished into the fog. By the time Lucas and the others arrived, there was nothing left but the echo of the shot and the smell of gunpowder. Maigret stood over the body, motionless. Around them, the station resumed its rhythm. Conductors shouting, passengers moving past, the indifference of life reclaiming space from death. He looked down at the dead man, the one who had once been a ghost, and murmured, Fate keeps its appointments, doesn't it? Later, back at the Quai des Orfèvres, he placed the blood-stained envelope on his desk. The ledger entry stared back at him, stark and unfinished. Shipment 46A, 200,000 francs gone missing, 2 brothers ruined, and a name that refused to die. He leaned forward, eyes on the window where the river light shimmered faintly through the rain. So, Villard, he whispered, it's your turn to speak. And beyond the glass, in the night outside, the Seine seemed to murmur in answer, steady, implacable, waiting. The dawn that followed was pale and metallic, the kind of morning that gave no warmth even when the sun finally showed its face. The fog had thinned, but left behind a chill that clung to the river and the bridges like a stubborn memory. At the Quai des Orfèvres, Maigret sat behind his desk, coat still on, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside him. The envelope Louis had given him lay open. Next to it, a single new piece of evidence, found in the lining of Louis's coat, rested like a small ghost on the table, a letter. The paper was creased, the ink faded, but the handwriting unmistakable. François Leclerc. Louis, if you are reading this, then I am already gone. They came for me sooner than I expected. Do not seek redemption. There is none left for us. The money is where you said it would be, but it is cursed. I kept your secret, though it broke me. You were right. Fate catches us in the end. Forgive me, or don't. I am tired of the silence. Maigret read it 3 times before setting it down. The words had the quiet resignation of a man who knew the truth had already passed beyond his control. He could almost picture Francois writing it, alone, the pen trembling in his hand, the lamp flickering over the walls of that narrow room on Rue Molière. Lucas entered, looking grim. "We have something, Chief. A witness from Gare du Nord. He saw the shooter." Maigret lifted his eyes. "Describe him." "Tall, dark coat, hat pulled low, nothing unusual except for the way he moved, limp on the left leg." Maigret's jaw tightened. "Villard." Lucas nodded. "We traced the car he left in, registered to the shipping yard near the Port de Bercy. Belongs to one of Villard's companies." Maigret rose, his chair scraping softly against the floor. "Get the car. We'll pay Monsieur Villard another visit." The port district lay half hidden under the low winter sun, its warehouses lined up like mute sentinels beside the river. The smell of oil, tar, and wet rope hung in the air. Workers moved sluggishly between crates, their breath steaming in the cold. They found the building easily, the same brass plate on the door, "R. Villard and Fils." But the shutters were closed and the lock had been forced from the inside. Maigret pushed the door open, his revolver resting heavy in his coat pocket. The interior was dim, lit only by the grey daylight filtering through a broken window. Papers littered the floor, and a single lamp burned on the desk, its light trembling. On the wall hung a map of Africa, Brazzaville circled in red ink. "Villard!" Maigret's voice carried through the space, steady and calm. "It's over." From the back room came a sound, the creak of a floorboard, the faint scrape of movement. Then silence. Maigret stepped forward slowly. The smell of kerosene grew stronger. He turned the corner just as a shadow detached itself from the far wall. René Villard stood there, his face drawn, his coat spattered with rain. In one hand he held a small pistol. In the other, a single sheet of paper folded twice. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "Inspector," he said quietly, "you should have left it alone." "Put the gun down, René." Villard smiled faintly, almost kindly. "Do you know what it means to live with guilt that isn't yours? I kept their secret for 20 years. The shipments, the missing gold, the man they buried. Francois wasn't supposed to die. He only wanted to tell the truth." "You killed him?" "No," Villard said. "I found him dead. Louis had already been there, but it was too late. I burned the documents, buried the rest, and still the ghosts came back." He lifted the folded paper in his hand. The last letter. Francois wrote it for the police, but he never sent it. "Give it to me," Maigret said. Villard hesitated, eyes searching Maigret's face. Then slowly he extended his hand. The letter trembled between his fingers. Maigret stepped forward, and in that instant the pistol turned. The shot cracked like thunder in the confined space. The smell of powder filled the air. Villard stumbled backward, a small, startled sigh escaping his lips, and then he crumpled to the floor, the gun clattering beside him. For a moment there was no sound but the hiss of the lamp. Lucas ran in, shouting for a doctor, but Maigret knew it was useless. Villard's eyes were already glazing, fixed on some unseen distance. The paper still lay in his outstretched hand. Maigret took it gently. The envelope bore no seal, only the faint imprint of a thumb. Inside, Francois's final confession waited. "To whoever finds this, my brother and I took part in something that began as greed and ended as punishment. The shipment was not gold, but men, forced labor sent under false contracts. We were told they would be paid. They never were. Louis took the money, I took the guilt, If justice exists, let it find him, not me. But I doubt it will. The river remembers everything, but it forgives nothing. Maigret folded the letter carefully, as though it was something fragile. His pipe hung forgotten in his pocket. When he and Lucas stepped outside, the wind off the Seine was bitter and sharp. Barges moved slowly through the water, and gulls wheeled overhead, their cries thin against the grey sky. Lucas broke the silence. So it was never about gold? No, Maigret said quietly. It was about men, about what they were worth, and what others thought they could buy. They walked toward the car in silence. Behind them, the police van arrived to take Villard's body away. Somewhere upriver, a church bell began to toll. Back at headquarters, Maigret placed the final letter beside the first, aligning them neatly on the desk. The story was finished, though it felt less like an ending than a confession whispered too late. He sat for a long time, watching the city fade toward dusk. Outside, the river carried its slow burden of light and shadow. The dead were gone, the truth revealed, and yet Paris, as always, went on breathing. Maigret reached for his pipe, struck a match, and said softly to the empty room, "The river forgives nothing, but it forgets, eventually." The smoke drifted upward, grey as the water outside, disappearing into the stillness. That night, Paris lay in one of those silences that feel heavier than noise, a silence born of exhaustion, of rain-soaked streets and the end of too many secrets. The city's heartbeat had slowed, and yet, somewhere beyond the fog, the Seine continued its patient murmur, whispering the confessions of men long dead. Maigret sat alone in his office, the lamplight casting a small, trembling circle across his desk. The letters, François, Villard's, and the unsigned ones from Louis, were arranged in perfect order before him. Together they told a story that no one had ever wanted to tell. A story of brothers and betrayal, of greed disguised as duty, and of the quiet, corrosive guilt that outlives them all. He drew on his pipe, the ember glowing faintly. The smoke curled upward and dissolved, like the past itself, vanishing into the air. Lucas had gone home hours earlier, leaving him in the kind of solitude Maigret both dreaded and understood. This was always how it ended, a desk, a confession, and the steady pulse of the river below. He opened François' last letter again, reading it slowly, his lips moving almost imperceptibly. The river remembers everything, but it forgives nothing. That single line seemed to hum in the room like a low note that refused to fade. Outside, the lamps along the embankment glowed pale and soft. He could almost see the ghost of the man who had once stood there, François Leclerc, walking home through the fog, unaware that his story would one day come to rest in this small room on the Quai des Orfèvres. A knock broke the stillness. The door opened quietly, and Janvier stepped in, hat in hand. "Chief," he said, "there's something you should see." Maigret looked up. "At this hour?" "They were dredging near Pont Saint-Michel," Janvier said. "A diver found something wedged under the old stonework. A trunk, rusted, half collapsed. They think it's connected." Maigret rose, his joints stiff. "The river gives back what it takes," he murmured. "Always." By the time they reached the bridge, dawn was a faint promise in the east. The scene was lit by the dull glow of lanterns, their light trembling across the water. The trunk sat on the embankment, dripping river water and silt. Its lock was broken, its hinges swollen with rust. A constable pried it open with a crowbar. Inside lay a few rotted scraps of fabric, a rusted revolver, and a bundle of papers wrapped in oilcloth. Maigret crouched, unwrapping them with the care one gives to fragile bones. The documents were colonial manifests, the originals. Not gold, not contracts, lists of names. He read the first: Jean-Baptiste K., 22 years, Mathieu S., 19 years, employed as laborer. Destination: Brazzaville. Page after page, line after line, not cargo, but men. Maigret's hand closed slowly over the papers. "They buried the truth here," he said softly, "in the only grave deep enough to hold it." Janvier stood beside him, silent. The river lapped against the stones as if listening. Back at the quay, Maigret wrote his report with deliberate precision. The ink flowed steadily, his handwriting broad and patient. "Case of François and Louis Leclerc concluded." He listed the facts, the forged manifests, the deaths, the rediscovered documents, but he left out the final judgment. There was no place in his reports for the moral weight of what men did when no one was watching. When he finished, he looked at the last line of his notes, and after a pause added a sentence almost to himself. "Some crimes die quietly, but the river never forgets." He signed his name and sat back. Outside, the city was waking. Across the Seine, the bakery on Rue de la Cité was already open, the first smell of bread drifting faintly through the morning air. Carriages began to rattle over the cobblestones. The great, indifferent machine of Paris was moving again, sweeping away the night's ghosts. Maigret extinguished his pipe, rose, and crossed to the window. The sky was clearing now, streaks of soft gold breaking through the clouds. For the first time in days, the Seine looked almost peaceful. He thought of François, the quiet man in the rented room, haunted by a past he could never confess. Of Louis, proud, cunning, dying under the false sky of a railway station. Of Villars, trapped between guilt and silence, his hand shaking as he lifted the gun. And of all the others, unnamed, forgotten, carried away by the same current that ran past his window now. He had solved the case, but in truth there had been no victory, only revelation. The kind that leaves a man more tired than before. Janvier returned once more before leaving for the day. "What will you do with the letters, Chief?" Maigret looked at the stack on his desk, damp, smudged, stained, with the lives they contained. "Lock them away," he said. "The river has already read them. That's enough." When the younger man had gone, Maigret stayed a while longer, listening to the faint hum of the city beyond the walls. He felt the familiar ache in his chest, not sadness exactly, but a kind of understanding. He had always believed that men committed crimes for reasons that were simple at first and unbearable later. Greed, pride, fear, and sometimes love twisted out of recognition. He closed the file, placed it in the cabinet, and turned the key. Then, as he did after every case, he took his coat and hat and walked down to the embankment. The air smelled of wet stone and smoke. He stood by the railing, gazing into the water. The current moved quietly, pulling the dawn's reflection into its depths. A barge passed beneath the bridge, and the ripples fanned out in slow, widening circles. Somewhere, deep below, the last traces of the Leclerc brothers still drifted. Fragments of paper, a lost watch, the memory of a promise never kept. Maigret took a long breath, his eyes soft with fatigue, and said under his breath, "Rest now. The city has forgotten you, but I have not." He turned back toward the Quai des Orfèvres, the day beginning behind him, the river murmuring its eternal secret. And as he disappeared into the waking streets, Paris exhaled. The fog lifting, the light returning, the story of the man who was already dead, finally carried away beneath the bridges of the Seine.